Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. Today I am really excited to welcome Laura Putnam. She is one of the foremost experts in workplace wellness. And I trust her implicitly when it comes to some of the most important trends that are affecting our work, positive and negative. And today I wanted to talk to her about this trend towards that we saw start during, I think, and after the pandemic of addressing mental health in the workplace. But man, we've gotten stumped and stuck. Most of those efforts have not really panned out. So what are we going to do about it? Laura Putnam, thanks for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Thank you, Josh. It's so great to be with you.
Amazing. Laura, you have been someone that I have followed for a very long time. We have adjacent passions. You wrote a book called Workplace Wellness That Works, and continue to um, provide some amazing efforts to improve workplaces through your Managers on the Move workshop and trainings. You have you've been doing a lot of thinking around this mental health piece because really, I mean, that's obviously there's the physical piece and you kind of we've got that and people kind of understand that and how do we get that sorted and we've seen benefits, but like I said, there's been a big turn towards the mental health space. We've seen a lot of revelation, like almost the sort of uncovering of some of the mental health challenges from that we all suffered from through the pandemic and the lockdown, but it really revealed kind of how much were struggling. So talk to me a little bit about what you've been seeing, because that was the past. What have you been seeing now as sort of like in the moment? What have we been seeing? What is the research saying? Where are we?
Well, I think that there's a collective realization that so many of us are just flat out miserable. I
Mm,
don't know how else to say it, but this mental health crisis has, for example, one study that came out during the pandemic found that rates of depression for Americans have tripled
yeah.
since the onset of the pandemic. And these rates of mental distress expressed through depression, anxiety, and even suicide continue to climb. And it is particularly impacting younger workers. So Gen Z workers are really the ones who are most impacted by this.
Mm,
So the question is, what do we do about it? And I would say that there is a growing consensus, and I'm so happy that this is happening, but there is a growing consensus that our approach up to this point has been one in which we identify the individuals at risk and connect them with the resources that they need. When the reality is that
mm,
every single one of us is at risk right now because
mhm.
the environment and the culture that we are all in right now is putting all of us at risk. And so the way I like to frame this in user-friendly language is let's stop focusing so much on the fish and let's focus more on the water that surrounds the fish. And the water that's surrounding the fish right now is
Yeah.
toxic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my first question is, why the threefold? Do we know why we're so miserable at work? I mean, why are we seeing increased depression? I mean, that's not just at work too, right? I mean, I think it's across the board. Where I mean, I think where you and I are most interested and where we're focusing this conversation is work, but is there a like what's the problem? Is it too many, too much screen time for the kids? Is it PTSD from the lockdown? Like why are we seeing this tripling of depression, incidents of depression?
It's a great question. I think one reason is because of these larger forces, which include things like our smartphones, which includes things like a decline in public institutions and gathering places like churches or synagogues,
Hmm.
um, or even bowling together.
Yeah.
Robert
Right.
Putnam book,
Yep.
Bowling Together,
Yep.
that
Yep.
there's been a decline in those. And so, really, as this outgoing Surgeon General spoke about, we are all incredibly lonely. And so I would say that's probably the biggest driver. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me is the fact that when you go onto a college campus today and you go into the student union,
Yeah. It's quiet.
it's silent,
Yeah.
silent.
Yeah.
We are alone together.
Yeah.
And this is impacting our people of all ages, but particularly our younger people. So I would say that that's really the number one factor. But it's also that combined with VUCA on steroids. So
Yeah.
volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity on steroids. We've got so many rapid changes that are happening. And I think that we all are just having a really hard time keeping up with all of that. And so we really have a perfect storm. So, for example, one industry that I've been working with pretty extensively, particularly on this topic of mental health, is the pipeline construction industry. So I worked with a consortium of 200 companies, all in the pipeline construction industry for 2.5 years. And if you look at that industry, not only do we have these larger issues like increasing isolation for all of us, increasing volatility and change, but also in industries like that, there are a lot of very specific issues. And one of the issues is what leaders like Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut are identifying is the plight of men, boys and men. That so for example, men account for 70% of the deaths by drug overdose. Men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women are. And I think, frankly, one of the outcomes from the Me Too movement, which I was very happy to see that there was a Me Too movement. It was high time that we really recognize the stress that women and girls have been undergoing. But I think that it's really created an identity crisis for many men.
Hmm.
And so that is another factor, particularly in male-dominated industries such as the pipeline construction industry.
Yeah, so where it's societal changes. I mean, it's probably, super powered by the social media and the comparisons, that we make to other people, and also the loneliness epidemic. So that makes sense now. I guess where I'm thinking is the question I've asked previously, just kind of from a point of being a devil's advocate, is like these are big societal issues. They're not issues that are emerging from work. They are certainly affecting the people who show up to work. But why is it our company's job to support us in this? I mean, if we're all at risk, that's a big lift. That's a big ask for organizations.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great question. And I think bottom line, we know that a healthy, happy workforce is not only good for people, it's good for the bottom line. So you give me any metric that matters to your organization, whether you're talking about productivity, you're talking about retention, you're talking about safety on the job, you're talking about profitability. And there is a business case that can be made for well-being in the workplace.
Mhm.
Healthy, happy workforce is good for everyone. So the question is, what can we actually do? And the prevailing narrative has been one around, well, we fix the individuals within the system as opposed to fixing the system that surrounds the individual. And so we need to think more clearly around how we can better start to change the systems around the individual, as opposed to just expecting the individual to become, say, more resilient in the face of the stress of, say, having to work with a
Mhm.
toxic boss, having to do the work of three. These are the kinds of things that we know have emerged. And these are the working conditions themselves, or having a culture in which it's not okay to talk about how you're feeling and to be fully authentic.
Yeah.
So the people who are best positioned within the workplace to better address these systemic issues are not the individual employees. but are in fact two specific types of leaders. Number one, there are what I characterize as the trendsetters. So these are the top organizational leaders. These are the people who effectively are uniquely positioned within the workplace to set the tone across the organization. So when top leaders talk more openly about their own mental health, for example, it creates an environment in which it's more okay to talk about your mental health. But
They're
furthermore, they are the ones who are the ones allocating resources and really setting policies.
they're
So
modeling
those
they're modeling that behavior,
exactly
making it socially acceptable to discuss, to bring these issues to the surface.
to a certain extent. So their influence is wide and diffused. Now, the the other key leaders are what I characterize as the permission givers. These
Permission
are your
givers.
team leaders.
Okay.
And while their influence is not as wide, their influence is deep for the team leaders that they lead, for the people that they lead within their team. They
Mhm.
have a profound influence. So, for example, the extent to which there is psychological safety is largely what's experienced within the context of the team. And so while there might be a company-wide policy and team and top leaders, the trendsetters talking about the importance of psychological safety, the extent to which that actually happens really happens within the team. And, borrowing from you, Josh, you actually talked about how every team leader has within their capacity to be able to carve out a little pocket of excellence within their team. And the culture that people experience when they are at work, and this is according to a 19-country study conducted by ADP Research Institute, is largely the culture that they experience within their team. And so this is why, whether we're talking about mental health, we're talking about psychological safety, or we're talking about overall well-being, those managers are so important. And whether or not well-being, psychological safety, mental health is part of their job description or it is not, they are the
It's
ones
part of
who
their
are
job,
affected. Yeah, they
whether
are the
it's
ones who are
part of the
uniquely
description or
positioned.
not. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so we're going from, hey, let's provide resources to individuals to, and this is, I think, inherently answering the question to, it's actually how these leaders, both the influencers and the trendsetters, are existing within the organization, and that goes right back to being, the very definition of what makes for a good manager, being a good leader inside an organization. The What I think is really fascinating about this is that we're really putting the responsibility on these internal leaders to establish that, um, create the water that we're swimming in, and they have the most direct influence. So, are we, um, probably the answer is all of the above. But I'm thinking about, okay, well, those are humans as well who are just as, uh, liable to, suffer. So are we supporting them, providing resources for them? Uh, and I can imagine, in addition, coaching, how to actually improve how they do their job. Like, how does it break down? And I know this is sort of, we're on the cusp of making this shift, and that's what we're trying to do, is amplify what you're trying to do, amplify this message, right? So we're on the cusp of this realization. So now what are we doing? What are we providing? Is it more corporate training? Is it more manager training? Is it, more resources for these managers? We're going to focus on those people, and that will amplify it.
So lots of questions packed in that, Josh, and great questions. So the first thing is, I'm just going to tackle this. What is it that the manager can do? And I think answering your question more largely is just being really clear about what each can do in their respective role. So it's about engaging the right people in the right way.
Yeah.
So the manager, yes, they need training, and it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. In that training, these managers need to understand first and foremost why well-being. Like, why does this matter? Why does well-being go hand in hand with performance? Why is it not possible to have a high-performing team if you don't have wellness, mental health, and overall well-being? That's the first thing. The second piece is that they need to understand why them. Why is it not enough to just have a wellness program that targets the individual, which is the way most
Mhm.
organizations offer up employee well-being at this point? It's a bunch of individual resources, lots of apps that are focused on things like growth mindset. Not that growth mindset is bad, but focused on, what you can do for your own mindset, what you can do for yourself, as opposed
Take a
to what
break, do a 10-10-10, do a
exactly.
5-3-7 breathing, whatever that
Yes,
might be, right?
which
And
are
all good stuff, right? That's all are
yeah,
all great coping mechanisms, but they're not moving the
exactly.
needle.
Yep. And so they really need to understand kind of an extension of we all know that people don't leave their job. They, by and large,
Mm,
leave their boss.
manager. Yep.
But part two of this proposition is, well, did you know that when it comes to the health of your heart, your boss matters more than your doctor does? That is, if you have a toxic boss, your chances of having a heart attack, not only today, but 10 years out, dramatically increases. And this is according to a multi-country study conducted by a research institute in Sweden. So this means when we hear people joking about how their boss is killing them,
Yeah.
well, they actually kind of mean it. And
Yeah.
it's not meant to scare managers. It's meant to simply awaken them to the choice that they need to make, which is, am I going to stick my head in the sand and pretend like this wellness, well-being, and mental health stuff doesn't matter and has nothing to do with me? Or am I going to put on my cape and become an agent of good, a force for good within my team, and really step up to become a multiplier of well-being? So, in order to become that multiplier of well being, the three key calls to action and ones that I have been issuing since 2014 are pretty straightforward, which is do, speak, and create. You got to do it yourself. I call this I want to see my boss in spandex phenomenon. So, you want to increase the uptake of any kind of wellness program, whether it's an on site yoga class or it's a mindfulness app or a lunch and learn or whatever it is. If
Hmm.
you engage your managers, the chance and those managers start to engage with those programs visibly, they do them out loud, then the chances that their team members will also engage with them dramatically increases. So you take your average employee assistance program, which is the typical tool that's provided for mental health, and you have managers actually use them and then take it to the next level, which is to talk about it. Then
Mm.
the chances that the team members are going to do the same dramatically increases. So again, those team leaders are uniquely positioned to model it and also to talk about it. But then finally taking it to the third piece, which is to really move beyond programs and to think more about the way of life. So every manager can create systems and rituals and activities within the team and do it as a team. So they start to shift the day-to-day experience for their team members. So their team members are a little healthy, a little bit more healthy, a little bit happier, a little bit more mentally well because of their direct supervisor and because of their team.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think um my question then is, what if my team is hybrid or remote? I mean, I've there's a lot, it's very hard to see the do part, right? Like you can talk about it. You're like, "Oh, I just got off the rowing machine," or whatever it might be. And I think that's very powerful in and of itself. But that is sort of a symbol of, does this work for remote teams, for distributed teams, for hybrid teams, right? Where you don't see each other as much.
Well, first of all, I have been talking a lot about return to office as opposed to continued work from home. I think there's a lot of problems associated with work from home, flat out. And I think that the long-term effects of this is going to be devastating. I think that there is nothing that replaces person-to-person connections. That said, certainly that's not something that a team leader has any control over. That again comes down to those top leaders. What are they going to decide to do? We do see more and more top leaders making the decision to come back into the office. While there's a lot of pushback on that, I personally think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that coming back into the office ultimately is a win for everybody over the long term. Now, the problem is where we are now. I mean, a lot of teams have, these teams have been hired up that are global. How are they ever going to go back to a return to office? And I certainly think that the solution of return to office, where you're effectively going into a cubicle and you're doing the exact same damn thing that you would be doing at home, which is you're on a Zoom meetings or
Yeah.
Teams meetings all day.
Yep.
That doesn't answer meet this problem
You're si-
either.
you're
So,
singing my song.
right. So ultimately, though, every manager has to work with whatever whatever is the scenario that they're in. Are they hybrid? Are they fully
Yeah.
remote? Are
Yeah.
they in person? So while I would say that, say, going for a walking meeting in person beats going on a walking meeting where everybody is on their phone as opposed to staring at their computer. Is the former better than the latter? Absolutely. It goes without saying. But it's not to say that there aren't still benefits
Yeah.
in having a walking meeting in which everybody is kind of getting up out of their seat, not
Yeah.
staring at their screen, getting
Yeah.
outside for some fresh air. Everybody is a little bit more re-energized. And there's also some interesting research showing that even if it's happening virtually, when we move, it actually primes our brains to connect with one another. So it can help to foster more connection within the team. And so again, that helps to push back a little bit against things like this larger trend of the loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, that's really, really compelling. I agree. I mean, one of the things that I recommend when you have, an organization that's almost fully remote, it's like you do need to get together. You do need to have that face-to-face time, even if it's, a strategy meeting for 3, 4 days in person, come together once, twice a year. So I hear you. I think that's really, really compelling. Um, the the piece about w- giving these managers those tools, like you're advising them. It's like I was gonna what I guess my sort of premise is, aren't you just asking managers to be better managers? And if it were that easy, they'd be better managers, right? Like to me, this all seems like part and parcel of, right, where you're like lifting them up, and I think there are certainly ways that we can all improve, but it's like you're just saying, hey, you're not being as good of a manager as you could be, please be better. And then maybe you're giving them some tips about the rituals and the walking meetings. Is that gonna solve it? Right, it doesn't feel like shining a light, like, I guess maybe put some urgency behind that, kind of like you can improve your team by doing these things, but that's isn't that the message that we've been giving, or at least I would imagine that we've been trying to give, where it's like better managers, better teams, better productivity.
Yeah, I mean, kind of very simply, don't be a jerk and be a good leader. Learn how to be a good leader.
Right.
Um, y-
Okay,
yeah,
fixed.
yes,
Done.
totally. I mean, that would go a long way. And I always marvel at the things that I suggest, which are so common sense. But there are things like, the 5-10 rule. If you happen to be in person, when you're 10 feet away, make eye contact with the person that you're going to be passing in the hallway, especially if they're a team member. When you're 5 feet apart, actually say hello. I
Yeah.
mean, it is ridiculous how common sense this is. I mean, I think that but I think that people need to, especially leaders, need to hear this in ways that they can hear.
Yeah.
So You
Right.
tell them the story, for example, of Douglas Conan, who was the CEO was brought in to turn around Campbell's Soup, which was a failing company at the time. One researcher from Gallup described it as being the most toxic company they had ever studied before. And Douglas Conan decided from day one that he was going to be tough on standards and tenderhearted with people. And the way he went about doing this was focusing on the daily touch points. So, on average, every leader has about 400 touch points a day. So, that is like you start a meeting, that's a touch point. You pass by somebody in the hallway, that's a touch point. You pick up the phone, that's a touch point. And so, he thought very deliberately around how could he in every single touch point uplift people instead of pushing them down. How could he exhibit civility? How could he
Hmm.
be a little bit nicer? And so one of the things that he did is he set aside time every day to write thank you notes, personalized thank you notes. And it's estimated that he wrote over 30,000 of these thank you notes during his 8-year tenure. And so, not surprisingly, he changed the culture across the organization, and that in turn translated into bottom line results that the company started performing better on the stock market. So you tell those kinds of stories, and these leaders, and effectively kind of saying the same thing, just a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And I think that leaders are able to hear it. But so much of the work that we do, Josh, whether it's from your end, kind of focused more on like values driven leadership, or it's my end focusing more on the well being, is really around connecting the dots. As we all anecdotally know, when we're
Yeah.
healthier, when we're happier, we do better not only in our personal lives, but in our professional lives as well.
I'm about to step into a room with 50 um, very stressed managers.
Hmm.
And the story that I keep hearing is that the work is so intense, it's so ongoing, it's such, high stakes. It's what we're trying to do is a reset. And what it makes me think of is kind of this I think tension that a lot of leaders today are feeling, which is I just have a lot to do,
Mhm.
and it it can be sort of this downward cycle or downward spiral of I'm stressed and then I don't feel like I have time or I'm going to be short accidentally because I wasn't taking care of myself. And it's sort of like down, 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 down. And the central tension of like pressure to deliver and the conception of your job as this leader is actually supporting these humans. And I think I don't have a conclusion. I'm just I want to kind of surface this reality of we can, it's like how do we help managers become more aware of the impact that they can have with those touch points with maybe a little bit of effort or just a little bit of caring and a little bit of self-awareness to kind of provide that space because my what I fear is the excuse of there's just not time.
Yep.
There is
Yeah,
just
and this
not
is
time.
totally and this is where, the message that I'm delivering over and over again is you don't have to be a wellness expert or guru. You don't have to be perfect. And in fact, when you imperfectly engage with your well-being, it provides a pathway for your team members to also imperfectly engage with their well-being. And furthermore, don't ever underestimate the impact that these small actions practiced deliberately and consistently over time really can make. So, for example, I often tell the story of a family member who is a pretty serious guy. He's actually now a state Supreme Court justice. And when he was working for the for the DOJ, for the Department of Justice, he had a boss who had a ritual that every time they would get together as a full team, that boss would set aside a beginning, where they would all share a movie that they had seen recently. So it was a moment of connection.
Mm.
And then that boss left, the new boss came in, and what did the new boss do? One of the very first things that she did was she got rid of that silly ritual because it was a waste of time so that they could go right into the work at hand.
Yep.
So when this family member told me about this change, there were literally tears in his eyes. That seemingly trivial, meaningless ritual meant that much to him and was that much of a bright spot for him. So I think that these managers really can create a bright spot for their team members. And, getting back to this water analogy, they can
Yeah.
start to create a little pool of well-being. So while the larger pool that they're swimming in across the organization might be incredibly toxic, everybody within that team feels like that they've got a little bit of a bright spot that they're in. Now,
Yeah.
I would add that it is not enough to just expect managers to be able to do everything within the context of their team, because that team exists within the context of the larger organization. And so this is why these trendsetters also need to be stepping up. We can't have a scenario in which, up to this point, we've been pointing fingers at the individual employee. Now we can't shift that so everybody just starts pointing fingers at the managers.
Yeah.
Instead, again, getting back to this idea, we need to engage the right people in the right way. Everybody has a role to play, whether we're talking about the top leaders, we're talking about the middle leaders, we're talking about the employees, or we're even talking about what I characterize as the activators, the people who are in HR and wellness, the people in L&D and OD who are kind of the ones who are trying to
Yeah.
make kind of lead people forward, activating the key influencers and providing the right resources.
Wow. Yeah, I think my takeaway is that, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy is talking about the incredible, just the incredible loneliness epidemic, and that work and the people that we work with is an opportunity to connect. How can we, as leaders, as managers, as influencers, even as individual contributors, create opportunities for connection to help at least start to mitigate some of the effects that are happening, society wide. It is no small thing to be part of an organization and part of a group that meets regularly. I mean, this can be community. It's the definition of community. There's obviously, we should think about many other things that we should be doing as well, creating community outside of work. But what a gift, what an incredible opportunity for really improving people's lives and bottom lines, right? Like that's like, why not? That's it. We just have to reframe it and say, look, this is part of the work. This is part of your job. And it's going to make everything not only more, your team not more productive, but you're going to make people's lives just a little bit better. And that, I mean, that to me
And not
feels
to mention
very,
your own life
yeah,
as a
yeah,
team leader. Yeah, I mean, it really is, to your point, this is an untapped opportunity. I think that there is a trend toward empowering managers. I mean, as I mentioned before we began this call, for example, a study that came out not too long ago conducted by McKinsey Health Research Institute, in which they found that well-meaning, well-intended organizations that are trying to do something about this rise in employee mental distress, that they are effectively solving for the wrong problem. That is, they keep providing resources for the individual, and the problem that would be more effective would be to solve for would be to instead engage managers, and that they really hold this unique position. But again, top leaders have a role to play, as do those
yeah,
HR wellness
yeah,
team members, as do the individual employees, not just the managers. But we have not been paying enough attention to that up to this date. And so how can we start to really activate those key influencers that have the capacity to change the water, not only within the context of the team, but across the larger organization, and even across our communities and even across our nation, across our world.
All right. Yeah, that's amazing. Laura Putnam, expert at workplace wellness. You can learn more about her at lauraputnam.com as well as upli@work.com, UPLI at work. Thank you, Laura, for reminding us just how important it is to connect with other humans like we have done today on our call. It's so wonderful to see you. And thanks again for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Thanks for having me, Josh.